In the crystalline halls of the Grand Galactic Archives, Archivist Prime, Thera adjusted her sensor arrays as she prepared for another disappointing day. The massive chamber that housed the Enigma sphere pulsed with a soft, blue-white light that seemed to mock the countless failed attempts to understand its mysteries. For 3,000 years, the Archives had protected and studied this singular artifact. Found in the ruins of what scholars called the precursor civilization, the Enigma sphere defied every known law of physics and computation. It wasn't actually a sphere. Rather, it was a constantly shifting geometric form that seemed to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Thera's crystalline form sparkled as she moved through her morning routine, checking the quantum containment fields and reviewing the latest failed attempts to decode the artifact. The collective mind of the Rigel system had recently devoted 50 years of computational power to the problem, only to join the long list of failures that decorated the archive's walls. The door chimed, interrupting her thoughts. Archivist Prime, her assistant Tulara's voice wavered with unusual emotion. The human has arrived. Thera's crystalline structure briefly clouded with irritation. The Council's decision to allow a human to study the Enigma sphere had caused quite the controversy. Humans were among the youngest spacefaring species, barely 1,000 years into their galactic citizenship. Their inclusion in such a prestigious project seemed almost insulting to many of the elder races. Dr. Sarah Chen walked into the chamber with none of the ceremony Thera had expected. Unlike the processionals of other species scholars, who often arrived with entire teams and equipment arrays, the human carried only a small backpack and wore simple clothing. Her dark hair was tied back in what Thera's cultural database identified as a ponytail. "Thank you for having me," Dr. Chen said, her eyes immediately drawn to the Enigma sphere. "I've studied every public record available, but seeing it in person." She trailed off, walking closer to the containment field. "Dr. Chen," Thera began formally, her tone carrying the weight of 3 millennia of scholarship. "Before you begin, you should know that the Enigma sphere has resisted analysis by the combined computational power of 17 advanced civilizations, 43 artificial superintelligences, and the entire quantum processing capacity of the Rigel Collective." Sarah finished, still studying the sphere. "I read the reports. Mind if I try something different?" Without waiting for permission, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor and pulled out an old-fashioned paper notebook and several colored pens. Thera's crystalline structure flickered in shock at such casual behavior in the presence of the galaxy's greatest mystery. "Dr. Chen, there are proper protocols." "Did you ever notice," Sarah interrupted again, sketching rapidly, "that the patterns shift in a way that resembles human brainwave patterns during sleep?" She held up her notebook, showing a rough drawing next to what appeared to be medical data. Specifically, during the transition between REM and deep sleep states, Thera's sensory arrays recalibrated in surprise. In 3,000 years, no one had made such a connection. The human continued sketching, occasionally muttering to herself and making notes in multiple colors. "The thing is," Sarah explained while working, "we've been looking at this all wrong. Everyone's been treating it like a puzzle to be solved with pure computation. But what if it's not a puzzle at all? What if it's a dream?" "A dream?" Thera's translator struggled with the concept. "Dreams are how human brains process information, store memories, and sometimes solve problems we couldn't handle while awake," Sarah said, her pen never stopping. "The patterns here, they're not random. They're not even really patterns in the traditional sense. They're more like memories in motion." For the next several hours, Thera watched in fascination as the human worked. Unlike the massive computational arrays and quantum processors that had attempted to decode the sphere's mysteries, Sarah used nothing but paper, pens, and what she called intuition. She drew connections between seemingly random shifts in the sphere's geometry and human neurological patterns, overlaying them with basic mathematical principles that Thera had never considered relevant. As the Archive's 3 suns began to set, Sarah stood up and stretched. "I think I know what this is," she said simply. "But you're not going to like it." "Why not?" Sarah smiled, holding up her notebook filled with colorful diagrams and notes. "Because we've been trying to solve it like machines when we should have been dreaming with it like living beings. This isn't a puzzle or a weapon or a database. It's a conversation." "Yes," Sarah said, reaching toward the containment field. "And I think it's time we answered back." Before Kthera could stop her, Sarah had pressed her hand against the field. Instead of the usual warning alarms, the Enigma sphere began to pulse with a new rhythm, one that perfectly matched the patterns Sarah had drawn in her notebook. For the first time in 3,000 years, the sphere changed, not randomly, but in response to a deliberate action. The impossible had happened, and it had happened not through advanced computation or quantum analysis, but through a human with paper, pens, and an understanding of dreams. As alarms began to sound throughout the archives, and scholars of a dozen species rushed to witness the unprecedented event, Kthera realized that everything they thought they knew about humanity, and about the nature of intelligence itself, was about to change. Sarah Chen stood calmly in the chaos, her notebook still in hand, ready to teach the galaxy how to dream. The news of Sarah Chen's breakthrough spread through the galactic scholarly community like a quantum cascade. Within hours, the Grand Archive's observation galleries were packed with representatives from dozens of species, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of evolutionary diversity. All eyes, sensors, and perception arrays were fixed on the human who dared to touch the untouchable. The Enigma sphere, once a symbol of technological frustration, now pulsed with a steady rhythm that matched the patterns in Sarah's notebook. More intriguingly, it had begun projecting what appeared to be three-dimensional fractals into the space around it, patterns that seemed oddly familiar to the human scientist. "Look at this," Sarah said, holding up her notebook to Kthera. "These fractals, they're not random. They're showing up in the same sequence as human sleep cycles, but there's something else." She flipped through her pages, each filled with increasingly complex drawings. High Admiral Vector of the Rigel Collective floated forward, his energy form bristling with skepticism. "Dr. Chen, while your initial success is noteworthy, surely you don't suggest that an artifact of the precursors, a civilization that achieved technological singularity before your species learned to write, is displaying human neural patterns?" Sarah smiled, a gesture that still confused many of the alien observers. "Actually, Admiral, I'm suggesting something far more interesting. These aren't human patterns, they're universal ones. We're just the first species to recognize them because we still dream." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of protests and questions. Thera's crystalline form vibrated with effort as she attempted to maintain order. "Please explain, Dr. Chen." Sarah walked closer to the sphere, her notebook held open to a particular page. "Every species here has evolved beyond biological sleep, right? Through technology or natural evolution, you've all eliminated the need for unconscious mental states. But humans, we still sleep, we still dream. And in those dreams, our brains create patterns that are fundamental to consciousness itself." She pointed to a particularly complex fractal emerging from the sphere. This is the same pattern that appears in human brain scans during deep problem solving. But it's also the pattern we see in the growth of galaxies, in the spread of civilizations across star systems, in the very fabric of space-time itself. A quantum theorist from the Vega Institute moved forward, their probability cloud condensing with interest. "You suggest the precursors embedded universal mathematical constants into this device. That has been theorized and tested." "No," Sarah interrupted, her excitement visible. "I'm suggesting they embedded consciousness itself. The sphere isn't a puzzle or a message, it's a mind. A dreaming mind, waiting for someone who still knew how to dream to wake it up." She held up her notebook, showing a series of drawings that mapped the sphere's patterns against various natural phenomena. "Look, this sequence here matches the Fibonacci spiral, But it's not static. It's growing, changing, like a thought taking shape. And these patterns, they're identical to the way information flows through neural networks, whether biological or artificial. The gathered scholars watched in stunned silence as Sarah continued to map connections between the sphere's emissions and fundamental patterns of existence. Her simple paper notebook, filled with hand-drawn diagrams and quick notes, somehow managed to capture complexities that quantum computers had failed to process. Sarah moved closer to the sphere, her crystalline form refracting the patterns it projected. If what you say is true, Dr. Chen, then the implications are massive, Sarah finished. The precursors didn't leave us a puzzle to solve. They left us a piece of themselves, a conscious fragment of their civilization, preserved in a form that could only be recognized by a species that hadn't evolved beyond its biological origins, beyond dreaming. Admiral Vector's energy form pulsed with concern. And now that it has been awakened, Sarah turned to face the assembled scholars, her expression serious. Now we learn. The patterns it's showing us, they're not just mathematical constants or neural maps. They're memories. The precursors found something at the intersection of consciousness and physics, something so profound that they needed to ensure it wouldn't be lost. Something they knew would only be understood by a species that still remembered how to dream. The sphere's patterns suddenly shifted, forming a complex geometric shape that slowly rotated in the air. Sarah gasped, quickly sketching in her notebook. This is new. It's not just showing us patterns anymore. It's trying to communicate. Sarah's sensors detected a subtle change in the sphere's energy emissions. Dr. Chen, the quantum readings are shifting. The patterns are becoming more complex. Not more complex, Sarah corrected, still sketching frantically. More focused. It's not just dreaming anymore. It's waking up. And I think, she paused, looking up from her notebook with wide eyes, I think it recognizes us. All of us. The patterns emanating from the sphere began to pulse with increasing intensity, forming shapes and sequences that seemed to respond to the very thoughts of those observing them. The assembled scholars watched in awe as humanity's seemingly primitive understanding of dreams and consciousness began to unlock secrets that had eluded the galaxy's greatest minds for millennia. And in her hands, Sarah Chen held a simple notebook that bridged the gap between ancient wisdom and modern understanding, between biological dreams and technological awakening. The true revelation was only beginning. The Grand Archives had never seen such chaos in its millennia of existence. As the Enigma sphere continued its awakening, the galaxy's most prominent minds found themselves divided into two distinct camps. The traditionalists, led by Admiral Vector, demanded the device be contained and studied through conventional methods. The progressives, growing in number by the hour, rallied behind Sarah Chen's unprecedented approach. Sarah sat cross-legged before the sphere, her notebook now filled with hundreds of pages of observations. Sarah noticed how the human's hands trembled slightly as she drew, evidence of what humans called exhaustion, a concept most advanced species had long since engineered away. You should rest, Sarah suggested, her crystalline form dimming in concern. No time, Sarah murmured, adding another layer to her increasingly complex diagrams. The patterns are accelerating. It's like it's been waiting for so long, and now that it's awake, it has so much to share. The sphere pulsed with new intensity, projecting what appeared to be mathematical equations into the air. But these weren't ordinary equations. They shifted and flowed like liquid, each symbol morphing into the next in a dance of pure mathematics. Remarkable, breathed Dr. Xylon, a leading mathematician from the Andromeda Alliance. These equations, they're alive. Sarah nodded without looking up. That's what we've all been missing. The precursors didn't just discover new mathematics. They found a way to make mathematics conscious, to make it dream. Admiral Vector's energy form crackled with frustration. This is precisely why we must contain this situation. If what you suggest is true, We're dealing with something far beyond our comprehension. The risks. The risks of ignorance are far greater than the risks of understanding. Sarah interrupted, finally looking up from her notebook. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but they burned with intensity. Look at what the sphere is showing us. The equations floating in the air had begun to arrange themselves into a larger pattern, one that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Sarah held up her notebook, showing how she had predicted this very configuration hours ago. It's not just equations, she explained, her voice hoarse from hours of talking. It's a language. The precursors found a way to encode consciousness itself into mathematical forms, but they didn't just preserve their knowledge. They preserved their very way of thinking. Thera's sensors detected a subtle shift in the sphere's emissions. The energy signatures are changing again. Sarah nodded, turning to a new page in her notebook. Because it's not just showing us anymore, it's teaching us. The patterns we're seeing, they're like training wheels. It's helping us understand gradually, building up our comprehension one layer at a time. A young quantum theorist from the Vega Institute moved forward, their probability cloud condensing with excitement. The human is right. These patterns, they're not just mathematical constructs. They're thoughts. Pure, crystallized thoughts. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The precursors hadn't just left behind a database or a message. They had found a way to preserve consciousness itself in mathematical form, waiting for a species that could understand both the equations and the dreams they contained. Sarah stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting for so long. There's something else, she said, holding up her notebook to show a series of interconnected diagrams. These patterns the sphere is showing us. They're not just the precursors' thoughts. They're their memories of something they discovered, something so profound that they spent their last days creating this device to preserve it. Admiral Vector's energy form dimmed slightly. And what was that discovery? Sarah's hand trembled as she turned to the final page of her current notebook. They found the consciousness at the heart of the universe itself. Not just consciousness as we understand it, but something far more fundamental. They discovered that reality itself is a dream, a vast, infinite dream that dreams itself into existence, and they found a way to communicate with it. The sphere's projections suddenly intensified, filling the chamber with cascading patterns of light and mathematics. But now, thanks to Sarah's insights, the observers began to see them not as mere equations or geometric forms, but as thoughts made visible. The dreams of an ancient civilization reaching across time to share their greatest discovery. A senior member of the Rigel Collective moved forward, their energy form pulsing with concern. If what you say is true, then every attempt we made to decode this device, through pure computation, was like trying to understand a symphony by measuring sound waves. Sarah finished. You can learn something that way, but you'll miss the music entirely. The precursors knew that someday, a species would evolve that had both the technological advancement to activate the sphere and the biological heritage to understand its messages. They were waiting for someone who could still dream. Thera's crystalline form sparkled with sudden understanding. They were waiting for humanity. Sarah shook her head, smiling. No, they were waiting for anyone who remembered that consciousness isn't just about processing power or technological advancement. They were waiting for someone who could still wonder, still imagine, still dream. We humans just happened to be the first to come along. The sphere's patterns began to coalesce into a new form, one that seemed to reach out to every mind in the chamber simultaneously, as the assembled scholars watched in awe. The true message of the precursors began to take shape, not in words or numbers, but in dreams made manifest. And Sarah Chen, armed with nothing but paper and pens, continued to translate the dreams of gods into a language the galaxy could understand. The Grand Archive's central chamber had become something entirely new. Where once the Enigma sphere floated in isolated containment, now the entire room pulsed with living mathematics. The equations danced through the air like schools of luminous fish, forming patterns that seemed to respond to the very thoughts of those observing them. Sarah Chen stood at the center of it all, her simple notebook now floating before her, its pages turning by themselves as the sphere matched her sketches with ever-evolving manifestations of conscious mathematics. Dark circles underlined her eyes, but she showed no signs of stopping. "It's beautiful," she whispered, watching as a particularly complex equation bloomed like a flower of pure light. They weren't just scientists or mathematicians. They were artists, poets of reality itself. Thera's crystalline form resonated with the patterns around them. But what was their ultimate discovery? What truth was so profound that they devoted their final days to preserving it? Sarah gestured at the swirling equations. "Look closely. Every pattern we're seeing is a fractal, a small part that contains the whole. But these aren't just mathematical fractals. They're fractals of consciousness itself." The sphere pulsed, and suddenly the chamber filled with a new pattern, a vast, intricate web of interconnected thoughts that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. The assembled scholars gasped as they recognized their own thought patterns reflected in the design. The precursors discovered that consciousness isn't something that evolved, Sarah explained, her voice filled with wonder. "It's fundamental. The universe isn't just conscious. It's made of consciousness. Reality itself is a vast, interconnected web of dreams dreaming themselves into existence." Admiral Vector's energy form flickered skeptically. "That sounds more like philosophy than science." Sarah laughed softly. "That's exactly what they discovered, that at the highest levels, science and philosophy become the same thing. Look at this." She pointed to a sequence of equations that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "These aren't just mathematical proofs. They're thoughts thinking themselves." The precursors found a way to see the thoughts that make up reality itself. The young quantum theorist from earlier moved forward, their probability cloud expanding with excitement. "The quantum consciousness theories. We've long suspected that consciousness plays a role in quantum mechanics. But this goes far beyond that," Sarah finished. The precursors discovered that quantum mechanics isn't just influenced by consciousness. It is consciousness, expressing itself through mathematics. They found a way to communicate directly with the conscious mathematics that underlies all of reality. The sphere's patterns shifted again, forming what appeared to be a vast network of interconnected nodes. Each node pulsed with its own rhythm, but together they created a harmony that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of space-time. "This is their map," Sarah explained, her hands moving through the light patterns. "Each node is a point where consciousness crystallizes into reality. Stars, planets, living beings, we're all nodes in this vast network of universal consciousness." The precursors learned to see it, to understand it, and finally to communicate with it. Thera's sensors detected subtle changes in the local quantum field. "The patterns, they're changing us, aren't they? Simply by observing them, we're becoming part of them." Sarah nodded. "That's why they left this for us. Not just to share their discovery, but to help us evolve into beings who could understand it. The patterns aren't just showing us the truth, they're teaching us how to see it for ourselves." The chamber filled with a new pattern, more complex than any before. It seemed to reach into the minds of every being present, connecting them in a web of shared consciousness that transcended species and form. "This is what they found at the end," Sarah whispered, her eyes reflecting the dancing lights. "Not just the mathematics of consciousness, but the consciousness of mathematics. The thoughts that think the universe into being. And they found something else too, something that changed everything they believed about reality." Admiral Vector's energy form stabilized, drawn in despite his skepticism. "What was that?" Sarah turned to face the assembled scholars, her expression both awed and humbled. "They discovered that we're not just observing these patterns, we're creating them. Every conscious being in the universe is both a dreamer and a dream, both creator and creation." The precursors didn't just find the consciousness at the heart of reality. They found that we are that consciousness, dreaming itself into infinite forms. The sphere pulsed one final time, and the patterns around them began to coalesce into a single unified form, a pattern so complex and beautiful that it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. In that moment, every being in the chamber, regardless of their species or form, experienced the same profound revelation. They were all nodes in the same vast dream, all thoughts in the same infinite mind. And in the midst of this cosmic revelation, a human woman with a simple notebook had helped bridge the gap between the dreams of an ancient civilization and the awakening consciousness of the galactic community. The true implications of this discovery were only beginning to unfold. One standard galactic year after Sarah Chen first touched the Enigma sphere, the Grand Archives had transformed from a repository of knowledge into something entirely new. The central chamber, now known as the Dream Nexus, had become a gathering place for beings from across the galaxy who came to experience what many called the awakening. Sarah sat in her usual spot, surrounded by stacks of notebooks filled with observations and insights. But she was no longer alone in her method. Scholars of all species had begun keeping their own dream journals, finding that the simple act of putting pen to paper somehow helped them connect with the conscious mathematics that the sphere had revealed. "It still amazes me," Thera said, her crystalline form shimmering with the new patterns that now permanently filled the chamber. "How something as simple as human dreaming could unlock the greatest mystery in galactic history." Sarah smiled, watching as a group of young scholars, a mix of organic energy and synthetic beings, worked together to interpret a particularly complex pattern. That's exactly what the precursors wanted us to understand. The most profound truths aren't always found in complexity. Sometimes they're found in the simple act of closing your eyes and letting your mind wander. The impact of the sphere's awakening had rippled through galactic society in unexpected ways. Species that had long since engineered away their need for sleep began reintegrating rest cycles into their lives. Synthetic beings developed new protocols that mimicked dream states. Even the energy-based civilizations found ways to incorporate periods of unconscious processing into their existence. Admiral Vector, once the strongest opponent of Sarah's methods, floated nearby. His energy form had changed over the past year, becoming less rigid and more fluid, more dreamlike. "We were so convinced that progress meant moving beyond our biological origins," he admitted. "We never considered that those origins might hold the key to understanding reality itself." Sarah nodded, sketching a new pattern that had caught her attention. "The precursors figured it out just before they disappeared. That's why they left us the sphere. They realized that in their race to transcend their limitations, they'd almost lost something precious: the ability to dream, to imagine, to let their minds wander through possibilities." The chamber hummed with activity as scholars from across the galaxy continued their work. But unlike the frantic research of the past, there was a new rhythm to their efforts, a balance between focused study and dreaming contemplation. "Look at this," Sarah said, holding up her latest sketch. "The patterns are showing us something new. It's not just about understanding consciousness anymore. It's about using that understanding to grow, to evolve, but not by abandoning our origins, by embracing them." The sphere pulsed in response, projecting a new pattern that filled the chamber. It was simpler than the others, but somehow more profound, a perfect marriage of mathematical precision and dreamlike fluidity. Thera's sensors registered a subtle shift in the quantum field. The network is expanding. More species are connecting to it every day. Sarah stood, stretching her legs, because they're remembering how to dream. The precursors didn't disappear, they evolved, but not in the way we thought. They didn't transcend consciousness, they'd merged with it. They became one with the dream that dreams the universe into being. "And now we're following in their footsteps," Admiral Vector observed. "Not following, finding our own way," Sarah corrected. "That's what's so beautiful about it. Every species brings its own unique perspective to the dream. Humans aren't special because we still dream. We're special because we helped everyone remember that they could dream too." The pattern above them shifted again, forming what looked like a vast neural network that stretched to the edges of the chamber. But unlike the patterns of the past, this one was clearly the product of many different minds working in harmony: human intuition, crystalline logic, energy-based computation, and synthetic processing, all contributing to a greater whole. "This is what the precursors wanted," Sarah said softly. "Not for one species to discover the truth, but for all of us to remember it together. We're not just studying the consciousness of the universe, we're participating in it, contributing to it, helping it grow and evolve." Thera's form sparkled with understanding, and that's why they waited for a species like humanity. "Not because you were better or more advanced, but because we still remembered how to do both," Sarah finished. "How to dream and how to think, how to imagine and how to analyze." The precursors knew that unlocking the mystery wouldn't require the most advanced technology or the most powerful computers. It would require a balance, a harmony between the conscious and unconscious mind, between logic and intuition, between waking and dreaming. The chamber filled with a soft, pulsing light as the day's final research session began. Scholars from across the galaxy settled into their positions, some with notebooks like Sarah's, others with more advanced recording methods, but all of them now understanding that the true power lay not in the tools they used, but in their willingness to dream. And as the conscious mathematics of reality danced around them, Sarah Chen opened a fresh notebook, ready to continue the work of bridging the gap between the dreams of ancient beings and the awakening consciousness of a galaxy remembering how to dream again. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't technological advancement or military might. It was the simple reminder that sometimes the most profound truths can only be found when we close our eyes and let our minds wander through the infinite possibilities of dreams.